Picture-perfect streets lined with Victorian mansions. That's what you'd see driving through Millbrook, Connecticut, a place where old money whispers and new secrets hide behind freshly painted shutters. But behind one particular door, a magnificent restored Victorian at 42 Maple Drive, something dark was taking root. The neighbors still talk about the screams they heard that summer, the kind that make you bolt your doors and draw your curtains, the kind that don't sound human. They'd see Mary Peterson the next morning, pristine in her lab coat, walking to her car as if nothing happened. But if you looked closely, you'd notice the trembling in her hands, the vacant look in her once brilliant eyes. Mary Peterson had everything: a distinguished career in neuroscience, social status, and a husband who seemed to worship the ground she walked on. Dr. John Peterson, the town's most respected psychiatrist, would tell anyone who'd listen about his brilliant wife. "She's my miracle," he'd say, his eyes gleaming with what everyone thought was pride. They didn't recognize it then for what it really was: possession. Not of the demonic kind, something far more insidious. It started with small things: a broken mirror here, a strange bruise there. Mary would find herself in rooms with no memory of entering them. She'd discover her clothes soaked in water, in blood, with no recollection of why. And John, ever the devoted husband, would clean up the evidence, comfort her, document everything. For her treatment, he'd say, for her protection. But then came the night of their 15th anniversary. The night Mary Peterson woke up screaming in ancient languages she'd never studied, her fingers bloody from clawing at walls that now bore symbols no one could decipher. The night John Peterson finally made his public plea for help at the Second Baptist Church, tears streaming down his face as he begged for someone, anyone, to help save his wife's soul. The town split in two. Some swore they saw Mary levitate in her garden at midnight. Others whispered about the strange lights in the Petersons' basement laboratory, the odd smells, the deliveries that came at strange hours. But no one, not a single soul in Millbrook, guessed the truth. No one except Sarah, Mary's sister, who would pay the ultimate price for her curiosity. You see, in Millbrook, Connecticut, a brilliant woman was disappearing piece by piece, replaced by something else. Not a demon, but a carefully crafted creation. And her creator? He slept beside her every night, watching, waiting, documenting every step of his masterpiece's descent into madness. This isn't a story about possession. At least not the kind that can be driven out with holy water and ancient prayers. This is a story about the darkest kind of possession there is. The complete and calculated ownership of one human being by another. And by the time investigators uncovered the truth, 3 people would be dead, a community would be shattered, and the world would learn that sometimes the most terrifying demons aren't the ones that possess your soul, but the ones that possess your trust. Welcome to the story of Mary Peterson. A story that begins, as all true nightmares do, with love. Or at least something that looked like love in the shadows. They met in the free lunch line at Millbrook High School. Mary Davidson, the gifted science student who spent her nights stocking grocery shelves to help her single mother pay rent. And John Peterson, the charismatic debate team captain who lived in his car between foster homes. 2 brilliant minds forged in poverty, dreaming of a future they'd build together. 20 years later, they became Millbrook's golden couple. Dr. Mary Peterson revolutionized neuroplasticity research at Stanford, while Dr. John Peterson's psychiatric practice served New England's elite. Their restored Victorian mansion on Maple Drive stood as a testament to their rise. Every architectural detail meticulously chosen, every antique carefully curated. The kind of home that made it onto charity home tours, where wealthy donors would marvel at John's collection of rare medical texts and Mary's pristine laboratory in the converted sunroom. Their Instagram feed told the story of perfection. Charity galas, where Mary stunned in vintage Dior, John's hand always protectively at the small of her back. Photos of them volunteering at the local shelter, John's compassionate smile as he counseled troubled teens, Mary teaching science to underprivileged kids, from poverty to prosperity, the local paper called them. The American dream personified. But dreams have a way of twisting in the dark. The first crack appeared during their 15th anniversary gala. Mary was midway through her speech about their new neurological research foundation when she stopped. Her champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattered across the marble floor. For 3 minutes and 42 seconds, caught on countless phones, Mary stood frozen, eyes rolled back, blood trickling from her nose. When she came to, she had no memory of the incident. John blamed stress, overwork, but the blackouts continued. Mary would wake up in strange places, the basement lab, the garden, the attic, with no recollection of how she got there. Security cameras John installed caught her wandering at night, touching the walls, writing strange symbols with her fingers. Then came Valentine's Day. The Petersons' annual dinner party turned to chaos when Mary suddenly began speaking in what linguistics experts would later identify as ancient Aramaic and medieval Latin, languages she'd never studied. She pointed to 3 guests, predicting their deaths in vivid detail. Within a month, 2 of those predictions came true in exactly the way she'd described. The incidents escalated. Neighbors reported seeing Mary floating 3 feet above her bed through the master bedroom windows. The local paranormal society set up monitoring equipment that recorded temperature drops of 40 degrees whenever Mary entered a room. John, the ever-devoted husband, finally broke down during Sunday service at Second Baptist, collapsing at the altar, begging for divine intervention to save his wife's soul. Millbrook fractured into factions. The old guard whispered about demonic possession, citing Mary's impoverished background as proof she'd made dark bargains to achieve success. Others, particularly Mary's scientific colleagues, demanded investigations into environmental toxins, gas leaks, anything that could explain the inexplicable. But a few people, a very few, noticed other things. How Mary only had episodes when John was present. How her vacant episodes increased after John insisted on personally managing her medications. How the security cameras in their home seemed to cover every angle except John's private study. How Mary's once groundbreaking research had quietly stopped being published. These observers kept their suspicions to themselves. After all, who would believe anything sinister about John Peterson? The man who lifted himself from poverty, who devoted his life to healing others, who so clearly adored his troubled wife. Only Mary's sister Sarah dared to look deeper, and Sarah was about to discover that the most convincing masks are often worn by those closest to us, those we trust to guard our bodies, our minds, and our souls. The transformation happened so gradually that most people missed it. The brilliant Dr. Mary Peterson, who once commanded lecture halls at Stanford, began to forget words mid-sentence. Her hands, once steady enough to perform delicate brain tissue experiments, now trembled constantly. The woman who had published groundbreaking research papers could barely remember to sign her name. Mary's just taking a sabbatical, John would explain at charity events, his arm wrapped protectively around his wife's waist. The episodes have taken their toll. But those who looked closely noticed how his fingers would dig into her skin when she tried to speak, how her eyes would dart to his face before answering any question. What no one knew then was that John Peterson had transformed their entire mansion into an elaborate observation facility. Hidden cameras recorded Mary's every move, while sophisticated microphones captured every whispered prayer, every confused mumble, every terrified scream. He labeled the footage meticulously: Subject MP-147, Night Terror Episode. Subject MP-148, Speaking in Tongues. Subject MP-149, Levitation Attempt. But John's most damning evidence lay scattered across town in prescription bottles. Haloperidol from Brighton Pharmacy, scopolamine from Walker's Drugs, experimental compounds from underground labs in Eastern Europe. Each prescription written under different doctors' names, each medication designed to bend reality just a little further. The truth festered beneath their feet. Behind a wine cellar's false wall, John had built a laboratory that would have shocked his psychiatric colleagues. Steel tables equipped with restraints, IV drips programmed to release precise combinations of psychoactive drugs. Notebooks filled with detailed observations. Subject shows increased suggestibility after combination A17. Recommend upping dosage for enhanced effect. But John's carefully constructed web had one loose thread: Mary's encrypted research files. Even in her increasingly confused state, some part of her brilliant mind had recognized the danger. Hidden behind complex algorithms were her own observations, molecular structures of unknown compounds found in her blood, correlations between John's treatments and her episodes, desperate notes written in moments of clarity. The horror of John Peterson's past began to surface like bodies rising in a flood. 3 women, all former girlfriends, had vanished years before he met Mary. Karen Chen, a promising medical student, Isabella Torres, a psychiatric nurse, Michelle Fleming, a pharmaceutical rep, each disappeared after reporting strange episodes of lost time and confused memories. Each had been treated by Dr. John Peterson for stress-related symptoms. Sarah Davidson, Mary's sister and an investigative journalist, started pulling at these threads. She discovered police reports filed by Isabella Torres describing someone tampering with her medications. She found Karen Chen's journal detailing experiments her loving boyfriend wanted to try. She uncovered Michelle Fleming's final email to her mother. "Something's wrong. John's helping me, but I feel like I'm disappearing." As Sarah dug deeper, patterns emerged. Before Mary, there had been others, experiments that failed, subjects who proved unsuitable. John Peterson hadn't just been building a possession story. He'd been perfecting his technique, refining his methods, learning from each failure until he found the perfect subject. A brilliant neuroscientist whose insights could help him push the boundaries of consciousness manipulation even further. In his private journals, John wrote of his ultimate goal: to possess not just the body, but the very essence of human consciousness. To prove that with the right combination of chemistry and conditioning, one person can truly own another's soul. Sarah Davidson was getting closer to the truth. But in the Peterson household, truth was a dangerous commodity. And John Peterson had spent years learning how to bury dangerous things. Sarah Davidson entered the Peterson house at 11:43 p.m. on a moonless Friday night. She had a key, a spare Mary had given her years ago. What she didn't know was that John had been waiting for this moment, watching her investigate, following her digital footprints as she uncovered his past. In John's study, Sarah found the leather-bound journal hidden behind a false panel. Its pages revealed horrors written in precise clinical handwriting. Day 1247. Subject continues to respond to suggestive therapy. The combination of compound X27 with auditory triggers has proven most effective. When exposed to the specified frequency, subject now experiences complete dissociative episodes, fully susceptible to external command. Her hands trembling, Sarah accessed John's private computer. The video files were organized by date, each one meticulously labeled. She clicked on one marked breakthrough, initial command success. The footage showed Mary, her eyes glazed, standing perfectly still as John's voice guided her through increasingly complex tasks. "You will forget this," his voice commanded. "You will wake believing demons possessed you. You will fear only me finding a solution." But it was the final video that made Sarah's blood run cold. Dated just 3 weeks earlier, it showed John injecting Mary with a pale blue liquid. "Tell me what you are," his voice demanded. Mary's response came in a hollow whisper. "I am yours. My soul is yours. My will is yours." John's laughter echoed through the speakers. "Perfect possession," he whispered. "Not by demons, but by science. By me." At 2:17 a.m., Sarah's encrypted email burst across the internet, sent to police departments, newspapers, and trusted colleagues. John Peterson conducting illegal human experiments, evidence in basement lab, Mary being drugged, previous victims. If you're reading this, I'm likely already. The email cut off mid-sentence. At 3:33 a.m., Mary Peterson woke up on the floor of their basement laboratory. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. Her hands were slick with it. And there, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights, lay Sarah's body, arranged in a pentagram drawn with her own blood. John stood in the corner, camera steady in his hands, his voice soft and soothing. "Look what the demons made you do, darling. Look what we'll have to save you from." But something was different this time. Perhaps Sarah's presence had weakened the drug's hold. Perhaps some part of Mary's brilliant mind had finally broken through. She saw the empty syringe on the medical tray, saw the familiar way her sister's neck was bruised, the same bruises she'd seen in the mirror so many times before. The realization hit her like a physical blow. There were no demons. There had never been demons. Only a man, meticulously crafting a possession story to hide his own monstrous experiment in control. At 3:47 a.m., Elizabeth Foster from next door made the call. Please hurry. I heard screaming from the Peterson house. Not like the usual screams. Something evil is happening. Oh God, I just heard another. The line went dead as Mary Peterson's real scream, her first genuine scream in years, shattered the night. It was the scream of a woman realizing she had been trapped in someone else's horror story. The scream of a sister discovering what had been done through her hands. The scream of a soul breaking free from its true possessor. But John Peterson just kept filming, his camera capturing every moment of his masterpiece's devastating finale. After all, he had to document everything. For science. For proof that he had achieved what no one else had. The complete possession of a human soul through the perfect blend of chemistry, psychology, and calculated love. The police would later say they heard that scream from blocks away. Not a supernatural sound, not a demonic howl, just the raw human sound of unimaginable truth breaking through years of carefully constructed lies. When the police breached the Peterson house at dawn, they thought they were prepared for anything. 20 years of law enforcement experience between them. But nothing could have prepared them for what they found behind that perfect Victorian facade. The command center was hidden in plain sight. John's study transformed into a surveillance hub. Dozens of monitors covered the walls, each displaying a different room, a different angle of Mary's orchestrated descent into madness. Officers discovered over 30,000 hours of footage, each file meticulously labeled. Morning routine conditioning, dinner response training, sleep pattern modification. Even the garden had cameras, capturing Mary's supernatural episodes for John's rapt audience. But it was the discovery of John's manifesto that revealed the true depths of his depravity. A 347-page document entitled Creating the Perfect Wife Through Chemical Conditioning, a Scientific Approach to Total Possession. Inside, John detailed everything. The careful selection of his subject, a brilliant neuroscientist whose own knowledge could be used against her. The calculated courtship, the gradual isolation, the precise chemical cocktails needed to break down resistance while maintaining cognitive function. Mary's blood work told its own horror story. The toxicology report read like a pharmacological nightmare. Experimental hallucinogens, cutting-edge antipsychotics, compounds so new they didn't have names, only numerical designations. Some drugs were designed to make her susceptible to suggestion, others to erase memories. A few, the lab noted with disturbing clarity, appeared to have been created specifically for Mary's unique brain chemistry. The basement laboratory defied belief. Behind the wine cellar's false wall, past the antique Bordeaux bottles and vintage champagnes, lay a state-of-the-art facility that would have made pharmaceutical companies envious. Equipment worth millions, custom-designed drug synthesis machines, a dedicated computer system modeling Mary's neural pathways, predicting her responses to various chemical combinations. Years of work, thousands of experiments, all focused on one goal, the complete possession of another human being's will. Sarah's body was found exactly as John had arranged it, the final piece in his elaborate theatre of possession. Her position, the symbols drawn in blood, the ritualistic placement of candles, all carefully staged to support his demonic possession narrative. But the truth lay in the precision of the wounds, in the calculated angles of the cuts, in the exact pressure points used to subdue. This wasn't the chaos of demonic violence. This was the methodical work of a man who had studied anatomy, who knew exactly how to make murder look like madness. John's video diary proved to be the most chilling evidence. Hours of footage showing him speaking directly to camera, detailing his breakthrough moments with clinical detachment. Day 892, subject now fully accepts the possession narrative. When shown video evidence of her own actions, she immediately attributes them to demonic influence. The integration of religious imagery with chemical suggestibility has proven more effective than anticipated. While investigators pieced together the evidence, Mary Peterson began her slow emergence from the chemical fog in the psychiatric ward of Millbrook General. Fragments of memory returned like shards of broken glass, each one cutting deeper than the last. She remembered the tiny pricks of needles hidden in loving embraces, the way John would hold her hand through each episode, his other hand steadily adjusting an IV drip, the sound of his voice guiding her through the darkness, not to save her, but to push her further into his carefully constructed hell. She remembered Sarah too, not just the end, but the moments before, her sister's voice cutting through the chemical haze. "Mary, look at what he's doing to you. Look at the evidence. You have to remember who you are." And for one brilliant, devastating moment, she had remembered. But John had been watching, always watching, ready with one final dose to ensure his masterpiece performed her ultimate role. As evidence mounted in the Peterson case, other stories began to surface. Other women who had fallen into John's orbit, other experiments that had failed, other lives destroyed in his quest for the perfect method of possession. But Mary had been different. Mary had been the culmination, the perfect subject whose brilliant mind had helped him refine his techniques, whose deep trust had allowed him to push further than ever before. The videos, the recordings, the journals, they all painted a picture of a man who had achieved something terrifying. Not demonic possession, but something far more horrifying: the scientific methodology for stealing someone's soul. The Millbrook County Courthouse had never seen a trial quite like this. For 6 weeks, the perfect facade of Dr. John Peterson cracked and splintered under the relentless hammer of evidence. The charismatic psychiatrist who once commanded respect now sat silent, watching his life's work exposed for what it truly was: a masterclass in methodical torture. Expert witnesses dissected his techniques with horrified fascination. "This isn't just criminal," testified Dr. Eleanor Chen from Harvard. "This is an entirely new category of psychological manipulation. He didn't just break her mind, he rebuilt it, rewired it, transformed it into his own private laboratory." But it was Mary's testimony that silenced the courtroom. She spoke for 9 hours, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. "I was awake," she told the jury, her hands steady for the first time in years. "Awake inside my own nightmare. I could feel my body moving, hear my voice speaking, but it was like watching a puppet show where I was the puppet. And the worst part? Sometimes I could see him watching me, smiling, taking notes on how well his latest experiment was working." As Mary's story unfolded, others began to emerge from the shadows. Karen Chen's sister, carrying a box of diaries documenting similar treatments. Isabella Torres's mother with photographs showing the same vacant stare in her daughter's eyes. Michelle Fleming's roommate remembering the strange phone calls, the confusion, the gradual personality changes. Each story added another piece to the puzzle of John Peterson's evolution as a manipulator. The medical board's investigation revealed an even darker truth. Among John's private practice patients, 27 had reported symptoms of possession. 17 had disappeared. The pattern was always the same: increasing episodes of lost time, growing dependence on John's specialized treatments, and finally, complete withdrawal from family and friends. But the true scope of horror emerged through John's encrypted communications. An international network of psychiatrists and researchers, all experimenting with chemical submission, mind control, and what they called consensual consciousness replacement. Labs in Eastern Europe, underground clinics in South America, private facilities in remote Asian locations, all sharing data, refining techniques, trading subjects. While John Peterson was sentenced to 13 consecutive life terms, Mary began the long journey of reclaiming her mind. In the rehabilitation facility, she worked with experts in trauma recovery and neuropharmacology. "The drugs may have left my system," she wrote in her journal, "but his voice lingers. Sometimes I still check my arms for injection marks after every human touch." Yet even as Mary fought to rebuild herself, dark echoes of John's work began to surface across the country. A doctor in Seattle using similar techniques on his wife. A therapist in Miami whose patients showed eerily familiar symptoms. A researcher in Chicago found with a laboratory reminiscent of John's basement setup. 2 years after the trial, Mary Peterson stood before a conference of psychiatric professionals. "The true horror," she told them, "isn't that one man found a way to possess another human being. It's that he created a methodology that could be replicated. Somewhere out there, others are reading his research, studying his techniques, learning from his success with me. And the next time this happens, the perpetrator will have learned from his mistakes." Today, Mary Peterson leads a research team dedicated to identifying and preventing chemical coercion. She still lives in Millbrook, in a small house with no cameras, no basement, and windows that always stay open. I chose to stay, she says, because running from darkness only lets it grow. Sometimes you have to stand in the place where you lost yourself to find your way back. John Peterson sits in solitary confinement, still writing his observations, still perfecting his methodology. His last words at sentencing haunt those who heard them. You can't stop the spread of knowledge. I may be locked away, but my research will find its way to those who understand its importance. The age of chemical possession has only just begun. And in quiet towns across America, in perfect houses with perfect couples, new nightmares are taking form. Nightmares born not of demons or dark spirits, but of the terrifying precision of modern science in the hands of those who seek to own not just bodies, but souls. Millbrook, Connecticut, carries its scars. A town haunted by the facade of perfection that once stood at 42 Maple Drive. The Peterson house remains empty, its walls stripped of secrets but unable to shed the whispers of its past. Tourists still drive by, snapping photos of the house where science met horror, their flashes lighting up the broken windows like phantom eyes staring back. Mary Peterson, now a pioneer in advocating for ethical psychological practices, has become a voice for the voiceless. Her speeches draw crowds. Her research funds programs designed to safeguard against the misuse of neurological advancements. And yet she lives quietly, her public courage balanced against private battles. I survived him, Mary often says, but I'll never forget him. And that's the price of freedom, carrying the memory of what you've escaped. Her voice, resolute yet tinged with weariness, echoes the struggles of countless others who have wrestled with invisible chains. In the dark recesses of solitary confinement, John Peterson's existence has become a chilling testament to the dangers of unchecked ambition. He writes compulsively, his thoughts spilling onto page after page. Guards who handle his writings refuse to read them, their fear stemming from the knowledge that ideas, once formed, can never be unlearned. But whispers persist of his disciples, those who see his methods not as a cautionary tale, but as a blueprint. The idea that somewhere in another quiet town, another perfect life could be meticulously dismantled chills even the staunchest skeptics. Knowledge is power, Peterson once declared, and in his warped genius lies the horrifying possibility that he may have been right. For Mary, the battle is far from over. Each step forward comes with a glance over her shoulder, each triumph shadowed by the lingering echoes of manipulation. Yet she stands firm, her story a beacon for those trapped in the labyrinth of control. I am not his masterpiece, she says, her gaze unflinching. I am my own. In the end, the Peterson story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that the most terrifying monsters are not conjured by the occult, but created in the laboratories of human ambition. It leaves us with a question, one that lingers long after the final page. If science can possess a soul, what hope do we have of reclaiming it?